It seemed like the helicopter was losing power, and I had time to say, "What's happening?" And he was pushing his pedals and moving this stick, and he had time to say, "I don't know," and then we were crashing through the trees. The first tree that we crashed through, the first limbs, I remember that, and I remember being really, really scared, and then really, really sad, and then something else, and then black. I just found out today it was probably 45 minutes that I was knocked out. And I've had anxiety before, surprisingly, in dens, claustrophobia, where you have panic attacks, and so I knew what I was feeling, and it was pure panic because I didn't remember anything. I didn't remember being in a helicopter, and it wasn't until I saw my personal camera and my telemetry gear that it all came back, and I was like, oh my God. And then I went from being really scared to completely ecstatic. And I was like, Ed, we're alive. I was like, Ed, are you okay? And then right by his head, fuel was leaking. And I'm like, what's that? That's fuel. And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, we got to get you out of here. And he's like, yep. And he's like, and he tried to move and he couldn't. And he's like, I'm pinned. He had a belt on, and I grabbed his belt and I turned him so that he was laying flat on the ground. It was really painful for him. His ribs, his hip, his ankle, his eye, everything was broken on his left side. He'd try to breathe and he couldn't, and so we'd rest, and then I'd be like, okay, 1, 2, 3, and then we'd drag, and he'd try and push with his right foot, and then he'd rest, and I think I dragged him not as far as I wanted to. I wanted to be away from that machine, but it was too painful. Ed was really coherent and thinking really clearly for all the injuries that he was, going through. It was incredible. I can't remember exactly what the cockpit was like because I don't know what impaled my leg. It's just a little dime-sized puncture wound. And then my hands hurt really bad that night. I feel like I had just lugged out 50, 200-pound bears from a den because my hands and arms get really sore from doing den work. And I just kept being like, wow, my hands are, I had all these cuts and those were sore, but I remembered that I had my antenna in one hand, the one that we go out in the field with, and then my receiver in the other hand. And when we went down, I must have just gripped him so hard. And the receiver was in my left hand, and when we went down, it's the only thing I can think of that would have hit my chin. My phone was in my back left pocket the whole time, which we hit on the left side, and it was totally demolished. But I could see on the top screen people calling, all these numbers I didn't recognize, and as more people called, it was vibrating, but it wouldn't recognize my thumb when I swiped it across the screen. And I was like, man, there's people that they must know. There's all these numbers I don't recognize. They must know what's going on. The phone doesn't work, the radio doesn't work, and I'm like, well, then I can walk to the road. I was singing and talking because I didn't want him to just feel like I was instantly gone and left alone. About 200 yards in, I heard a car, and it sounded like it was right there. There was a white van that came down, and her name's Patty Brown, and I waved her down, and she pulled over, and she's like, are you okay? And I said, I was just in a helicopter crash, can I use your phone? And I called Ed's wife, because before I left, he said, call my wife. And I said, what's her number? And we tried to look for a pen and paper, and I couldn't find one, and I'm like, just tell me, I'll remember. And so he told me, and so I called his wife first, and then I called and said that. She was like, oh, I knew you guys, I knew it, I've just been waiting for your call. I'm like, well, Ed's okay. And then I called 911, and then other people had started showing up at that point, because there's a girl with blood down her leg standing in the middle of the road. And then I called my boyfriend and told him that I was okay. But working for Randy on the Bear Crew, there are a lot of situations on a smaller scale that you put yourself into where you have to overcome irrational fear and your body's intense desire to run. I think all the training finally came to a head where it actually mattered. I think of myself as strong-willed and driven and I like and enjoy challenges. I also don't like to let fear and emotion take over, you know, how I do things. And so the reason I really enjoy these jobs is because they challenge me in those areas. And that may be what was helpful, you know, on the ground at the crash.